thank you all for attending today. I'm George Crowley. I'm the Senior Associate Dean here in Sterl College of Business, and I am privileged to introduce Dr. Rob Mathner from our School of Hospitality, Sport, and Tourism Management, who's going to talk today about some of the cool work he's doing. Rob, in addition to his faculty position, also serves as our undergraduate program coordinator for sport management, teaches a variety of topics in sport management, has a long 14 years, I believe, is the number that we've settled on as far as your career in NCAA and compliance prior to
14 years.
the move to academia. He's been doing a lot of work in a variety of different areas, but one of his main research areas of interest that he's going to talk about this project today is in the area of sports betting, point shaving, things of that nature. I think people are very familiar with, or at least familiar with that taking place at the professional level or in the NCAA level. Some of the stuff Rob has, and that is part of his larger research program, but some of the stuff that he's uncovered with this project in particular is the amount of this that's taking place at the high school level, and some of the outside influences that are involved in that. So I'll get out of the way and let Rob kind of walk us through his research, because it really is cool, and it's got some really good implications for policy and administrators and athletes themselves. So,
Yeah, great.
Rob?
Thank you so much, Dr. Crowley. Yeah, thank you. So in preparation for coming here today, I kind of walked through in my own mind how I wanted to lay the foundation out and the catalyst or the impetus for the study and why this area and things like that. And I wish I could say I was smart enough when I started here in '07 to even have a vision for this line of research. But it really came about somewhat quite by accident, and I'll share that with you in just a moment. But I think, as a Division I athletics administrator for 14 years at Division I schools, when I was working in college athletics, one of the greatest fears that we in administration had, among others, was despite what we would attempt to do or could do with regards to educating all the stakeholders on NCAA legislation, there's a limited amount of control over the actions of 17, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds, right? So you can educate everybody on what the legislation is. The membership votes on it, passes it, and we enact it, and then it's passed, and then we have to educate everybody on what those rules are. And fortunately for me, when I was at Florida State earning my PhD, the director of compliance there had a very comprehensive wagering education program that was in place. And I think to understand where we've gotten to today, it's important to understand why this even got started, way back when. So the membership, the NCAA membership, has rules in place to really preclude or punish or limit the amount of wagering that goes on in and amongst NCAA member institutions. And at the time, it was really only for student athletes. And the reason was pretty simple. And the professional leagues have had similar rules in place. Now, the primary reason that there is legislation that prohibits gambling, and that is the legislation. The legislation says, at the NCAA level, right, the memberships pass this, it says not only can student athletes not gamble on their own sport, they're not even allowed to gamble on any sporting activity in which there is a championship sponsored at within the NCAA membership. So in other words, if you're a student athlete and want to gamble on NFL football, MLB baseball, any professional sport, you're not allowed to gamble on that if that same sport has a championship within the NCAA membership. And the penalties for those transgressions are pretty harsh, quite frankly. If you were found to have gambled on any sport in a variety of ways, I won't go into the minutiae on that, 1 year suspension. I mean, this included even something as simple as we're in the middle of March Madness right now. We've got student athletes that want to get together and kind of bet on March Madness. You got a track athlete, a water polo athlete. And if you put money down, if there was anything of material value that exchanged hands, That's a bet. That's considered a bet. So the rationale behind that was pretty simple, twofold. Number one, they obviously wanted to protect the integrity of the game, right? So if you're betting on your own sport, the opportunity to change the outcome of that game certainly exists, right? That's called point shaving, where you perform at a level, or you do something to affect the points in the game, and then people would bet on that game knowing that there's someone as a participant that's going to affect the outcome of that game. And they stand to make money off that, including you, right? So if you're a willing participant, you might have been brought into this situation for a variety of reasons, okay? So that's the first reason. The other reason, quite frankly, was this mental health concept that exists today, but gambling is very, very addictive. It's called the hidden addiction, right? And people can get sucked into this, and it becomes very, very competitive, and it could run amok very quickly. And so from an addiction perspective, we the membership wanted to try to head that off at the pass to the degree that we were able. I would say to you that the membership probably could have done some different things regarding the penalties on that, because the reality of it is, without going into a whole lot of detail, if a student athlete gets caught testing positive for drugs, there's a series of penalties that aren't quite as harsh as the penalties are for sport wagering. So if someone's gambling because they have an addiction, which is a mental health component, there's a way, and there's avenues in which that student athlete can potentially still participate without being cut off from participating for a year, losing a year of eligibility. But if you're caught gambling, it's 1 year. If you're caught gambling on your own team, permanent. You're done forever. And so, I mean, that's why the legislation is so harsh. And so what the membership has been doing for quite some time now, they've been putting out surveys every 3 to 4 years to the student athletes at the Division I, II, and III levels. Very comprehensive. So you're talking over 30,000, 40,000 athletes. And they've been putting out these surveys to kind of gauge the prevalence rates of student athletes gambling. How many of them are gambling? How many of them are gambling in other areas besides sports, right? With the proliferation of statewide lotteries and things like that, trying to gauge the behaviors of our student athletes. And so that's been going on for years, and the numbers have been alarming at times, but at other times the most recent studies have shown that the number of student athletes who are indeed engaging in this behavior has gone down, okay? And so that's a good thing. With all that said, the population group that has not been studied and was not studied was the area that we got started on back in, over 10 years ago. And so the NCAA was surveying student athletes, but this legislation is not just for and applicable to student athletes, it's applicable to full-time athletics department staff members as well. Meaning that coaches, athletics directors, everybody that's involved in athletics also is precluded from wagering on sports. Again, all in an attempt to protect the integrity of the game. So the membership had put forth these studies every 3 to 4 years on student athletes, but no one has ever studied the other population, which was the employees, the practitioners. No one ever looked at that. And so that gets me to the point where I arrived here at Troy, and I remember it, like it was yesterday. I'm up in the training room in the towers, and at that time, on Mondays, there was the doctors coming down from the Andrews Clinic in Birmingham to look at not only our student athletes, but especially in the fall with football going on, they would have a quote-unquote public clinic for high school athletes to come in and get looked at by the esteemed and renowned Dr. Andrews and his staff. It was his staff coming. I don't think he came down. But so they were mixed in, so the general public was mixed in with our student athletes on that floor. And I remember I was getting treatment or something like that, and I saw our star quarterback at the time in the treatment room on the second floor, getting treatment on his ankle. I think it was his ankle. And other people from the general public were there as well. And I got to thinking, I said, well, you know, this is interesting because if the general public doesn't know the severity of Omar's ankle injury, if they don't know how to place bets. But if they're in here and Coach Blaney doesn't say anything about Omar's ankle for the game coming up, but you see him in here and he's hobbling like there's, you know, he needs crutches, all of a sudden you, as a member of the general public, now have information about Omar's injury that might very well lead you to be able to place a bet based on the fact that you now know that Omar's ankle is worse than what has been led on to believe by the coaching staff or the administration. And so this whole thought process got me thinking about the other part of the legislation that is in the books, which is not only can you not bet on games, you as a student athlete, you as a staff member, you cannot provide information to people about, for lack of a better word, the mental and physical well-being of our student athletes with or without the intent of placing a bet. In other words, you don't necessarily have to know that they're going to use that information to place a bet, but certainly that happens. It's almost like y'all understand what insider trading is on Wall Street? It's the exact same concept, right? And that's illegal. And so they got me thinking about, holy cow, we got trainers, we've got equipment managers who are in the locker room with football and basketball players all the time, and they hear players talk. We've got athletic academic advisors who spend a lot of time with student athletes, right? And we've got strength coaches who also spend a lot of time with student athletes. All of them, by virtue of their association with the program, with the student athletes, all of them are privy to information that people who gamble would love to know so they can maximize their earnings and potential to win bets on football games. So if you pass along that information and provide it, that too is problematic and against the NCAA's membership's rules. But that part really hasn't been studied a whole lot by the membership, and that's the area that got me thinking. Man, if I'm an athletic trainer, if I'm an academic advisor, if I'm an equipment manager or a strength coach, man, if I have this information, I'm not placing a bet. I'm just going to tell somebody else, hey, so-and-so here, you know, no one knows this, but the quarterback and his girlfriend, his fiancée, just broke up. And he's a mess mentally. Or, you know, coach isn't leading on to this, but this guy, this running back, man, his quad injury is really bad. He's probably not going to play on Saturday, but we're not going to let that out because we don't want the other team to know that our running back health has been compromised, right? So all that information that folks are privy to, you're bound as a member of the athletics department staff and as a student athlete, you sign forms in every year saying that you won't do this, you're educated on you're not going to do this, things like that. But there's never been any studies done on whether or not the athletics department staff members have been abiding by the same rules that the student athletes are bound by. So no one really knows. So that really was the thought process for the initial line of research that we did, which focused on athletic trainers, strength and conditioning coaches, advisors, and equipment managers. And what we found out through the various studies was that, oh yeah, they're gambling just like anybody else, you know, they're doing it. And they are knowingly and unknowingly passing information along to other people. Some of it was known for gambling, some of it was not. When we talk about knowingly and unknowingly passing information along would be along the lines of, oops, did I just say that? With, you know, upon reflection and retrospect, you say, ooh, yeah, I probably shouldn't have said that. There was no intent initially, but it happened. Knowingly means, yeah, I knew what I was doing, right? And so both of those factors weighed into the research. And we found out that, yeah, that's happening. It really is, right? And so we've got 3 manuscripts published on that line of research. What we then were looking at, and what the literature was coming to as we were delving through this and researching, what the next line, because the NCAA was looking at this as well, what was becoming very clear was that these student athletes and other students, because the research shows this, they weren't gambling on sports and other areas when they first got to college. That wasn't their first foray into gambling. What the research showed was that this behavior was actually starting at the high school level as adolescents. That's when it was starting. Very few college students and student athletes placed their first bet in college. And part of that is due to, among other reasons, the proliferation of credit cards and online internet gambling, the ease of which people can access these sites and place bets. It's very easy, very, very easy to do so. So this behavior that's been out there for quite some time, the NCAA is also cited it as, hey, this is not their first rodeo, so to speak. What hasn't been studied was a subset of that adolescent population, which was, what about the high school athletes? If the NCAA is surveying their student athletes, right, who's surveyed high school athletes? No one. No one has. And so that is the line that we're currently in right now, is the surveying of high school athletes. And so we started this about 4 years ago. Unfortunately, it happened right on the cusp of COVID. And so our initial study really wound up being more of a quasi-pilot study, if you want to call it that, because our N numbers were hard to get. It was hard to convince administrators during the COVID period to get any groups of people together. We didn't have it online. But we got enough of an N number to look at the results, and the results were pretty startling. I say pretty startling. They were surprising, but maybe not so much. Among other areas that surprised us was the fact that we had, of the 300 plus responses, I think we had 11 or 12 people, actually more than that, it may have been like 14, high school athletes say that they themselves alter the outcome of a high school game for money at the high school level. Meaning that, and we didn't go into the line of questioning as to how this relationship developed, but they put down, yep, I took money or something of value to change the outcome of the game. Now, when we talk about changing the outcome, it's not necessarily changing the outcome from a win to a loss or a loss to a win. It could be, when we talk about point shaving, it's just maybe not winning by as many points or losing by more, right? Because that's how the point shaving works. So that number kind of initially blew us out of the water. I mean, you mean to tell me that high school athletes are on the take? Yeah. Like, they're taking money to change the outcome of the game? Yeah. Which points to an even bigger problem, which really is more like a white elephant in the room. I know for a fact over the years I've talked to a lot of high school athletes that were here at Troy. And there's been a few other documentaries about this happening at like the youth level, like Pop Warner football. But, you know, when we talk about point shaving on a national basis, the Las Vegas and other areas will publish betting lines on a daily basis for games. Who's favored and by how much? And usually you would place bets legally or illegally using those lines that are put out there by the betting services and organizations out of primarily Las Vegas. What isn't done is the betting lines on high school games. Vegas doesn't do that. So who determines that a team should win by, you know, this amount of points over another team? Well, what's happening is all that is done under the table, behind the scenes, behind closed doors, in bars, you know, by local betting organizations that will establish these. All those lines are illegal. Okay? So what we know is that, number one, there are indeed organizations, mom and pop betting, operations popping up that establish these lines and are able to get enough action from the local community to place bets on high school football games. To the degree that there's enough money changing hands that they can afford to pay a high school athlete X amount of dollars to change the outcome of the game. So there's really a couple concepts here that are troubling. Number one, we know now that high school games, the integrity of those games are in question, can be in question. That's undeniable by the pilot study that we did. So that's happening, okay, at least with the population group that we studied. And number two, we've got high school athletes that are already engaging in behavior that puts them in a very compromised situation, one from an addictive behaviors perspective, but anytime that you are on the take, meaning that you've agreed to do this, now you're beholden to a group of people that can blackmail you, and they've got you right where they want you to have you do other things that most likely are not legal, right? Which is going to be criminal in nature. That's the reality, and that was the concern, and why even at the NCAA level, we really push our student athletes to not gamble a whole lot or go to casinos, make themselves visible, because even if it's legal, you're of age, and you do that, and people know that you're gambling, the moment you start getting into debt from gambling and that becomes a known fact, the easiest way for you to get out of debt, if it's a lot of money, is to, oh, well, let me just erase this debt. I'll play in this game right here, and I'll fumble 3 times, or I'll miss 3 free throws and make sure that we don't win by a certain amount. And that $50,000 I'm in debt, I'll get it right back. No one will ever know, right? We still win the game. We just don't win by 10. We win by 6. So that's the concern, right, of the image, the optics of, athletes gambling. And so that's where the problem really arises. And so for us, what we have done upon presenting this information at a conference in May in Atlanta, we applied for a grant with the University of Nevada, Las Vegas to take the study and do a more nationwide study to kind of really dig down into whether or not we've got problems or what is really out there. And if there are problems, if this is problematic, what can high school athletics associations and individual school districts do to, one, obviously make sure that from a mental health perspective, from a addictive behavior component, that we're addressing this. And of course, the other problem is the integrity of the games. High school athletics in a lot of states are money makers with championships. They have TV contracts, they have sponsorships, things of that nature. Football is king in the South. Obviously, a lot of vested interest in the South with regards to football, and in some states it's basketball. So it is a big deal, and I don't know if the high school athletics associations really want to know how bad this is, because if they know how bad it is, then they're really going to have to address it, and if they have to address it, that means they're going to have to spend money to do so. So I'm guessing, I don't want to speak for the high school athletics associations, but that's been my guess, right? I reached out, for instance, I've reached out to the National Federation of High School Athletics Associations several times, trying to get their support in some way, and it was crickets. Now, the National Federation is not a governing body as much as it is a library. In other words, they don't have any real power over the state associations, but the state associations go to the National Federation for guidance on a variety of issues. And having their stamp of approval would have been very helpful. But they didn't want anything to do with it. They never returned any of our calls or correspondence. So, and in talking with others who are much more learned than me, much more published, much smarter than I, the discussion was, well, why would they return your call? They really don't want to know this is going on at their level. And that was coming from 2 different people who have published 5 times more than me. So again, that's their opinion. It's not based or rooted in fact or research. But So that's what we're doing. We are in the midst right now of, just before I came down here, I was reaching out to my contacts. What are some of the challenges that we face with this? Number one of the challenges in surveying this population group is, number one, they're underage. Right? So in a sense, by virtue of answering some of the questions, they could be, in theory, implicating themselves in criminal activity. That's always a challenge, right? So at the high school level, in talking with a couple of superintendents who are my friends and some others, there are some superintendents that hate surveys at the high school level. They don't want anything to do with them. It's disruptive, all that good stuff. So I think for us, one of the challenges might be is getting that response rate via what we call a randomized methodology, meaning that we truly have the list of high schools, and then we pick them, and then we send out an invitation to participate. And if we get crickets, no response, or a no, then we got a secondary list. If that's a no, then we're going to have to revert to a more convenience type of sample where we rely on our contacts to talk to people at the high school levels who might say, yeah, I know this, we can get this done. It'll pass muster with legal counsel, no problem. One of the common pushbacks that we anticipate getting is that these questions are intrusive, they can incriminate, all that. However, the counter argument to that is very simple. Almost every state at the high school level, at some point in time during the school year, puts out surveys very similar to this. It's called a risk behavior survey. They call it they have different acronyms in every state. But almost every state throws out these surveys to their high school sophomores and juniors, and they're gauging risky behavior involving areas like smoking, drug use, alcohol use, driving, social media now, things of that nature. So they're already asking these questions. And as a matter of fact, my contact in Florida said some states even ask questions about gambling because of the fact that that state has legalized gambling through lottery systems, or even now sport wagering is legalized in a lot of states. So they're already asking those questions. So if that's the pushback, our response is, hey, look, you're already asking students questions about risky behavior. This is just a more specialized questionnaire asking more in-depth questions about a topic that you're already asking your kids about in the school system. So we hope to get the response that we need to go forward with the deliverable, which is due in July to the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. We're not trying to get anybody in trouble. We're not trying to point fingers. Quite frankly, it's just the opposite. We really are concerned. I'm concerned about the addictive component of this. It's really addictive. The joke is, if someone's addicted to drugs, if someone's addicted to alcohol, and you interact with them, at some point in time, the physical evidence of their addiction will reveal itself, right? Through a variety of ways. If you're addicted to gambling, it's hidden. I don't know, unless somebody comes in and whacks you across the leg because you didn't pay your debt and you got 2 broken legs, then I know something's up. But that's the problem with gambling. And so we want to make sure that we head that off at the pass and provide some meaningful educational directives and or are open to other ways in which, if this is identified as a problem, that certainly high school associations should be on the forefront of providing some kind of educational programming to combat this for all the right reasons, right? I mean, the state of Alabama was one of the first states to address a sportsmanship issue that had arisen at the high school level. And now they did. I'm not sure if they're still doing it, but I know for the longest time, every student athlete and every high school coach in Alabama had to take and pass a sportsmanship test in order to participate in high school athletics. And that was a direct result of some of the issues that were popping up with fights, taunting, things that weren't nice. So, it can be done. If they identify it as a problem, then certainly the level of resources that should be devoted to that should be looked at, no doubt. So that's where we are. When when we conclude this, next potential, the next potential line of research, which is going to be even more difficult to probably get enough of a sample size, is very similar to what we did with the college practitioners. The next line of research, depending on what this outcome what this next line of research shows, is I'd like to talk to high school coaches, high school athletic trainers. What do they know? Because if the students are betting, wouldn't it stand to reason that maybe some trainers at the high school level might be doing the same thing? If we go back, here's the interesting theory that I'm throwing out there. I think now, more than ever, collegiate student athletes and their prevalence rates for gambling is going to go down, both for gambling and for point shaving, because the way the legislation has been trending is becoming much more deregulated, meaning that the opportunities for collegiate student athletes to earn money while they're in school has gone through the roof. So really, money for those high-profile positions in football and basketball where you can affect the outcome of a game, those guys and gals at basketball, they have opportunities now with NILs to make additional money. And so the allure, the attraction for point shaving and or gambling to make extra money is just not there anymore. It's diminished. So I think that probably is going to keep on going down, those numbers at the collegiate level. However, my thought is that high school athletes now are kind of where college athletes were 5 years ago. You've got high school athletes who have devoted a lot of time and money to their craft. Some are still economically disadvantaged. They might feel entitled. They might need extra money here and there. Excuse me, I don't know. But I think that high school athletes, and oh, by the way, if you're a high school coach, a high school trainer, a high school strength and conditioning staff member or the like, right, you're not making a ton of money. You're just not. So again, if money is the catalyst, the impetus, the reason that you might be tempted, it stands to reason at the high school level that could potentially be the reason why people take a chance. No one's ever going to find out. This is a local thing. It's between me and the bartender over there who has his little mom and pop gig going on with point shaving, right? No one's going to know. So that's kind of the rationale is, okay, if we get this, when we get this done, is there a way for us to survey coaches and things and people of that nature? I'm hopeful that might be the direction we go in. I had one other thought and it's escaped me. That's what happens when you get old. I think that pretty much covers the research from inception to where we are today. There are some other opportunities for additional grants that luckily for me, I've been able to connect with some people at some different universities that might have some additional funds that might even be able to explore some other areas and use some different resources to explore this a little bit more. So we'll see. It's interesting. I really can't believe that. I wish I could say I had the intellect, the knowledge, and the foresight to really say, well, this has to be done. I stumbled upon it and I ran with it. And I can't believe no one else has really done it or duplicated it or replicated it in any way here in the States. I guess the other line of research could be pairing up with some people in Europe, because in Europe, gambling is much more pervasive than it is here in the States. It's more out in the open. And there probably is going to be some opportunities for me to pair up with some researchers in Europe to look at not college athletes, because in Europe they really don't have college athletes or high school athletes representing their school, but there's going to be some other opportunities to look at that adolescent population in different ways as it relates to gambling. That might be another line of research. So I think that covers it. I can't think of my other last thought that I was going to try to get across. If it pops up to me, I'll, awkwardly bring it to your attention. So, thoughts, questions, comments? Anything that I may have forgotten that you might want to ask? I will say this, that none of this would have been possible without the assistance of Dr. Christina Martin, who's been invaluable, as well as some other people in the industry who are much smarter than I, much more knowledgeable, have many more contacts, and have graciously devoted their time to some of the projects that we've embarked on. And so I'm not going to lie to you that Dr. Martin is very, very helpful and continues to be very helpful in a lot of ways with regards to the methodology of how best to conduct these surveys. Our statistics are very simple, they're very descriptive. We're not doing a ton of statistical research on the information we're collecting. It's very descriptive, which is exactly what the NCAA does. We're not running these complex statistical analyses. If we were, it'd be above my head probably. I'd have to get a crash course in some of that. So, so it's pretty simple to look at and read when you get the results.